Started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Emily Wilson. I'm the VP of Engagement here at the Collaborative for Teaching and Learning. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we're a nonprofit based in Louisville, Kentucky. We've been here for a few decades, doing lots of different work around the state, all in support of empowering teachers, empowering school and district leaders to create really equitable and engaging learning experiences for students. So thank you for joining us. Just a couple of sort of context setting things before we dive right in. The impetus or inspiration behind this series of webinars is really come out of KDE securing a new comprehensive literacy state development grant. We call it KYCO here in Kentucky. We're just so excited that KDE has been able to bring another one of these opportunities to our state. I think the new grant has been written so smartly and that it's in really wonderful alignment with a lot of the efforts and initiatives that are going on in our education setting in general. By no means is this a conversation exclusively for folks from Kentucky. This grant in particular gives effort and emphasis around HQIR acquisition and supporting teachers with those resources through job embedded PD. It also gives special attention to our struggling readers and an increase in family engagement. None of that is specific to Kentucky. Today, we're going to be focused on HQIRs and on curriculum-based professional learning. And quite frankly, that's a conversation that lots of us are involved in. The grant's focused on ELA, but I think a lot of our conversation today is applicable in any discipline. Anywho, this is number 2 in a 4-part series. Our next one, we've decided to pivot a little bit on number 3. And here is where I just ask you for a bit of help. In conversations with school and district leaders, recently we are finding that folks have a really strong idea, some really tested practices around family engagement in maybe the birth to grade 5 or 6 space. But when we start to move to middle and high, we see that folks are struggling a bit more. So if you know of someone who's got a really innovative approach to family engagement at middle high, if you yourself in your district see a really innovative approach, please shoot me an email and let me know, because in our next session, we'd like to dive into that. And just some quick goals for the day. Thank you, Jenny, for the slide. This is really just an opportunity to raise awareness about this great opportunity, leverage collective voices, and maybe have a chance to, look beyond our individual setting where HQIRs and curriculum-based professional learning are concerned. So with that was 3 minutes. I feel like I did really well. I'm going to hand it over to the folks you really want to hear from. So I'll kick it to you, Jenny, my colleague, to introduce yourself and our wonderful panel. I'll be here in the background if anybody needs anything.
Thank you, Emily. I am so grateful to be here today and to be able to facilitate this conversation with our expert guests and partners. I am Jenni Aberli. I am a program specialist and ALM manager at the Collaborative for Teaching and Learning. In case you're not familiar, ALM stands for Adolescent Literacy Model. I have the great privilege of introducing our colleagues here and facilitators in facilitating this conversation. I was privileged to work with Dr. Guskey many years ago. We actually co-authored some articles together, and we won a National Staff Development Council Award for Best Evaluation of Staff Development many years ago. So I'm super proud of that and proud to be on this screen with you today, as well as with Hirsch, who is the founding executive director of EdReports. I have worked with EdReports for many years as a reviewer, as a writer, most recently as a Clave Fellow, which gave me a great opportunity to learn more and spend time advocating for high quality instructional resources and materials. Such a great experience for me. So thank you both for being here today. We're honored to have you. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So really our agenda for today is to focus on 3 big questions around the phases of high quality instructional resources and implementation, curriculum-based professional learning, and leadership moves. So you can see with these topics why we have our two guests here with us today, because they are certainly the experts around these topics. So we're going to start with the phases of high quality instructional resource implementation. And here's the first question we're going to start with. So what's a typical implementation approach? What kind of decision makers do we need to have at the forefront of their minds as we think about each phase of this endeavor? Because we know that implementation is a big task, and we know a lot of things need to be thought of up front. Eric, I'm going to ask if you wouldn't mind starting us off with your response here.
Sure. And first off, oh my goodness, Jenny, thank you for all your work at EdReports. We are a by educator for educator group reviewing instructional materials to empower local districts to make right decisions for them about what materials to select to support their students and educators. And all our work is predicated on drawing upon the excellence of educators like you. So I can't even start talking about our work without acknowledging your work, because that is truly the foundation of what we do. I kind of want to take it maybe almost a half step back to how you select, because the instructional resources and how you select really start to get at being thoughtful about an implementation plan specific to the materials and specific to your district needs. So first off, I want to shout out a great resource while we're acknowledging the Kentucky Department of Ed, and that is their Reading and Writing Instructional Materials Consumer Guide that is on their website that has a lot of this similar information that's also on our website and our adoption steps. And one thing I say a lot when we are talking with states and districts, that how you choose matters to whether the materials are used and implemented in the first place. So really ensuring you're thoughtful, not only on your implementation plan, but a step prior around selection, that it includes and really acknowledges the expertise of educators who are centering students, thinking about the instructional vision within the district. What are you hoping to accomplish? And then really starting to go from there to look at data. How many districts who are listening in actually know the literacy materials that are in use classroom by classroom? And notice I didn't say procured. That's a very different question, what you purchased and may include in this grant, than whether or not it's actually utilized by educators. Educators need to know from whence it came, know it will actually address some of those challenges around student learning, and align with an overarching vision that helps every student learn to read and learn overall. And there are a lot of different materials that are out there. And there are huge differences in the materials on our website that may have met our criteria. And so we're excited, hopefully, that folks can utilize EdReports as part of the notion of selecting an evidence-based HQIR set of materials. But at the same time, green doesn't mean go. It's a starting point. There are so many conversations communities should be having that can be seen in these reviews. What kids are reading. So again, as part of that selection process and thinking about implementation, really understanding the text quality, the aspects of foundational skills, and then building an implementation plan that honors what's in the material and starts to move educators in their instruction towards better learning for kids.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate that, because in the work that I have done with districts and the work that CTL is doing right now, we're having those conversations. I appreciate green doesn't necessarily mean go. It's a great place to start, but you have to know your students, you have to know your teachers, your population, and also that selection process. You were talking about those keywords, and at CTL, a lot of those match with the selection process and how we would coach schools along and districts along with making those choices. Dr. Guskey, what would you have to add?
Well, let me begin by saying it's such an honor to be with this distinguished group this morning. I so admire, Jenni, we did, as you mentioned, had the opportunity to work together some years ago, and that was such a great experience. Eric followed his work and the kind of things that he's been doing there, really trying to bridge that gap between research and practice, which is huge in some places, and especially with regard to what we're doing in education today. What I am pleased about being a part of this group too is to sort of bring to light some of the issues that I think are really important. What we're doing today is talking about a lot of how issues, but I always press people that the most important thing as you begin planning for this is to think about why and what's our purpose? What are we trying to accomplish here? And really to start the whole planning process by thinking about what impact you want to have on students and how would you know if you had that impact or not? To really think about, with all these things that we're doing and implementing this new kind of curriculum and strategies approaching that curriculum, what would we look for in students and what impact would we hope to see and what evidence would we trust to verify that that really occurred? So to really get using that whole philosophy of what they use in architecture, the idea that form follows function, and to think about your purpose and why you are trying to accomplish this. If this really worked, if it was ideal, what results would we see with our students? And what evidence would we trust to verify those results have really been made? So I think if we use that as our starting point and think about the impact on students, what impact we want to have, how we would know that impact, and even recognize that we have multiple stakeholders in this process that don't always trust the same evidence. I did a study a few years ago where I took 15 different indicators of student learning. And they range from things like classroom assessments and final examinations, statewide assessments, large-scale assessments, homework, all those kind of things. And I gave them different groups of educators and said, all these are sort of valid source of evidence on student learning. What do you think is the best? What do you trust? What do you think is the best representation of how well students have learned? And I asked them to rank order of these 15 things. So they had to compare each one with every other one. And what was interesting is that when I analyzed the results, I compared the results of school leaders with classroom teachers. They were almost exactly reversed. Classroom teachers said, I trust my own evidence. I trust the CI thing I see coming from my students, the stuff that I get on a very regular basis. Where the school leaders said, we've got to look at those statewide assessment results. We've got to look at the large scale assessments. And so what this says to me is that no one source of evidence is going to tell the whole story. And because we have multiple stakeholders in this process, it's really imperative we consider multiple sources of evidence to verify that what we're doing is really making a difference for our students in ways that we trust and ways that we value.
Yeah, and that's the goal, right? Students, we want to make a difference. We want students to grow. We want students to learn, which is a great segue into this next question. So we've made our selection and we've got the boxes, we've got the stuff. Like, what are those barriers to adoption? Like, what are some of those next best moves that leaders can make after they've got them? I know that I go into schools and my colleagues as well. And as we're coaching teachers, as we're working with administrators, like we get to go into those back rooms and those storage rooms. And even some of our schools who have adopted, like we see the boxes of things. And so we're thinking like, it doesn't stop there. Like we have to provide more support. So what do we find to be those barriers? And what can we do to make sure that teachers are using those materials to the best of their ability to help kids? Dr. Guskey, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, it's clear that it's important in the planning process we consider those kinds of barriers. And I've been advocating that a really valuable way of planning is to think about those the 5 levels of evaluation evidence that we've described now and used in a lot of instances, but to actually reverse the order of those when it comes to planning. So if in planning for implementation, the first thing you consider are what impact you want to have on students and what evidence you would trust to verify that impact has been made. You take a step back from that. You can say, okay, if this is what we want to have accomplished with our students, what are the strategies or materials or approaches or practices or policies that would lead to that impact? And what evidence verifies that it will? Is that evidence trustworthy? Is it valid? Is it similar to what we've been in our context? Then once you settle on those strategies and practices, the next step back you take is to the organization and ask what organization policies and strategies, resources must be in place in order to gain high quality implementation. And we find that a lot of really excellent research has been done just in recent years looking at those aspects of organization support and change. Matthew Kraft of Brown University has done some really wonderful studies looking at leadership and the role of the building principle in particular in bringing that about. That a lot of programs fail miserably because a lack of active engagement and support from building principals. We find that building principals also are instrumental in developing follow-up for implementation strategies. I mean, teachers will want to get together and talk about what they're doing, but they need someone with building-wide responsibilities that's going to say, okay, Thursday after school, let's sit down for an hour and talk about how things are going. I'll buy everybody a Diet Coke and a donut, and we're just going to find out how it's going here. And I often get invited to those meetings. I'm supposed to be the expert. Rarely do I say a word. Because one teacher brings up a problem, and before I have a chance to say anything, another teacher will say, you know, I had that same problem. Here's the way I worked it out. But it's those structured opportunities for that follow-up that seem to be really crucially important. And even at the organization level, as you suggested, Jenni, looking for policies and practices that might be impediments to implementation. In recent years, for example, I've been doing a lot of work on grading and reporting. We find that there are many grading policies that actually are counterproductive to the instructional practices we're trying to implement. I mean, to give you a quick example, if you're working on project-based learning and you want kids to collaborate and work together and help each other do well, that's a wonderful strategy and has wonderful, valuable effects on students. However, if you try to implement that in a high school, where the grading policy is to calculate a cumulative GPA that they use to rank students at the end of the senior year, that ranking is used to determine who's going to be the class valedictorian, kids are not going to collaborate and not cooperate because it makes that ranking makes it very, very competitive. Helping someone else do better hurts your chances for success. For a student to move up, somebody else has to move down. And so here we have a school policy that actually is implemented only because we've always done it that way, not really because we ever thought of the advantage it provides students, that might be impeding the development of programs could really be advantageous to kids. Then after you get those organization supports and change, then you turn to what knowledge and skills teachers have to implement it well. The last thing you consider are what professional learning experiences can we plan to help people acquire that knowledge and skills. So just that reverse order can be really instrumental and really effective in guiding really more highly effective professional learning experiences.
Thank you, Dr. Guskey. Eric, anything you'd like to add?
Ooh, it's hard to build on that. It's so fantastic. It's interesting. I think even prior, there's kind of a hearts and minds aspect around implementation. And the first piece is actually helping teachers understand that this is a catalyst and not a constraint. We often have found that educators are our greatest advocates and our greatest detractors around curriculum use. And that is from messages they may have received in teacher prep that you don't care about your kids and you're supposed to martyr yourself for 90 minutes every night, hunting and pecking and searching on Teachers Pay Teachers or Google to go lesson by lesson. as if you can ensure systematic and explicit instruction and foundational skills 150 times in a row in a way which is virtually impossible, through the fact that curriculum hasn't always been of the greatest quality. And the curriculum has sometimes been used as a way to deprofessionalize teaching. Those things are real, but the materials market has changed dramatically. I think what we know about high quality curriculum and curriculum-based professional learning has changed dramatically. So again, back to that selection, helping educators understand the why, helping them understand that you should use it in a way Dr. Guskey really back mapped for us, and that this is a resource to catalyze. So after that, it does get into the nitty gritty. The first thing school leaders need to know is whatever publishers may have said they will throw in as an added bonus on implementation with your purchase of the material is likely insufficient, right? When you think about implementation, it's not just familiarizing yourself or a one-day, half-day pullout before the year starts. It's really understanding the difference between the materials you are building into this grant selecting and building in a strong implementation plan. And by the way, leaders and boards budgeting for that, so that we really can understand how this is different than what we had in plan. So as we look at some of the green materials on our website, some of them don't have a foundational skills program built in. They leave a plug-in component for a supplemental reading program. Implementing that is amazingly different than picking something that may have a huge teacher guide or just looks so substantially different from what they learned and how they've been teaching. And an implementation plan into ongoing support really needs to incorporate those things. And just as Dr. Guskey alluded to, there are so many systematic aspects within the school and district that have to be leaning in and supporting that, from finding time, from emphasizing that we're not going to close our doors and do what we're going to do, that we're going to be talking about curriculum. It's part of our evaluation. It's part of what we talk about data, and it's integrated into our professional learning communities and really part of what we continue to come back to, because the scope and sequence, the content, the basis of the lesson plans are the resources that will be used as something to come back to with your professional learning, tying your content, tying your knowledge, and building around implementing that with integrity and skillfully, which doesn't mean following it page by page, every single task, every single unit, but really using it as a resource to get the best out of instruction on behalf of kids.
I appreciate that, Eric, because here at CTL, when we are out in schools working with teachers, coaching them for strong instructional and literacy practices in their classroom, we're looking at their materials, we're looking at the data, we're coaching, we're providing ongoing professional learning experiences because we want them to be able to give their students the best that they can. And you mentioned something that I'm going to transition to our next segment around professional learning. You talked about integrating with fidelity. A lot of times we'll talk about curriculum and whether or not what the priorities are, and whether or not the expectation is to integrate that curriculum or to teach that curriculum with fidelity or integrity, and what the difference of that is. So we think about when we provide teachers, how do we, with those high quality instructional resources, like how are we going to support them? What is it we're asking of them? And what immediately, like, is the task at hand? You've got the boxes, you've got the stuff. It's August. Like, what is it that we do, and how can we support them in that work? Dr. Guskey, you want to start us off with this one?
Sure. Well, yeah, I just want to emphasize how important what Eric brought up was. And even in this work we've been doing recently in grading and reporting, we've been a lot of time the last few years interviewing students and their parents and their perceptions with regard to this. It kind of relates to your next topic for this series. And what we found is that parents and families rarely question us about rigor, which was kind of surprising. They question us about clarity. They will go along with things that what we our best judgment of what we should do for kids, but they want to know what that is and why. And I think that in this same realm, that as we move toward these new approaches to instruction, these new types of materials and new curriculum, I think for the practicing teachers, clarity will be the primary issue. You know, why are we doing this? What are the advantages of it? You know, and really deal with those clarity issues. And then that allows us to lead into the what's, you know, what is it about, and the how's of how do I do it? But that notion of the clarity, the purpose behind it, and the idea that this is positive in these ways, and this is the advantage that will lead to you, but really identifying for them exactly what it is and why it was developed and the rationale behind it, so they understand that and have some then a more, you know, some rationale for commitment to it up front. Now, granted, all of our evidence also indicates that teachers do not develop commitment to any particular innovation or strategy up front. You know, they will. I have always said that when I work with any group of teachers, if I can change them from cynical to skeptical, I'm really happy. All I hope is that they leave there skeptical enough to say, I'm not so sure, but I'll give it a try. Because if by giving it a try, they see it makes a difference for their kids. That's so important to them. And so along with this, then we need to build in some mechanism whereby teachers can see through early implementation efforts that it is making a difference for the kids. The kids are engaged more, that they like the activities, they're reading more outside of class, they're talking about things in ways that show the information they're gathering is relevant to them. All those kind of things would be really helpful if we bring that clarity to the process from the start.
Yeah, and mentioning that clarity process makes me think of that adoption process, right? Up front, we have to pull in many stakeholders around this process and communicate, have a communication plan along the way, so that this isn't something that's just dropped on teachers and they're like, what is this? Why are we adopting this? It's part of that process. So they're right, once we get the materials, like we're buying in, we're ready to go and to do this hard work. Eric, what might you add?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge here, right, of the literacy materials we've reviewed, about half have met our criteria around having some of these key evidence-based components around foundational skills, around quality texts, that they support knowledge building and the like. But what we see is only about a third of educators report using high-quality instructional materials in a week. And using is only once per week. So we're talking about 2/3 of educators not using quality materials in their classroom. And so when you look at the question, what we're really asking of you, use your materials. And I think thinking about it, well, so first off, make sure you build into this grant something that is worth using and can bear the weight of curriculum-based professional learning and being central around the instructional process. But then within it, I think it is also really working with educators to understand, again, what it means to use it skillfully and with integrity, not follow every page, but not to take out all of the tasks that actually require students to read the texts as you start to really scaffold and think about accelerating learning and really thinking about it, because we know teachers teach kids, the materials don't. So I think just that initial step of them understanding the why, that we're starting to use it. And then as you start to think about where that use is most important, it really is around those foundational skills in K2, where the rigor, as Dr. Guskey already brought up, is most important to give kids those foundational elements. As we start to really think about what kids are reading, making sure texts are engaging, affirming, and meaningful, and really work with kids and community. I think thinking about what integrity is feels a little different in terms of the channel in which you're really encouraging educators to personalize and accelerate. But on those foundational skills in K2, where we're really teaching kids to read, we're really looking at the progression of phonics and building phonemic awareness. That's when, oh my goodness, get materials that are evidence-based and use them.
Well, and I think this is a great segue to our next question about professional learning. So a lot of times teachers will get professional learning that's just a one-off, or we're just going to go get our hours, or we sit and get, and we walk away, and then what comes of it? So what distinguishes this curriculum-based professional learning from that more general, like just instructional coaching or professional learning? Eric, do you want to start us off?
Sure, although I'm going to go quickly because we all want to hear from Dr. Guskey. But I will tell you, I don't go anywhere without having within arm's length my standards for professional learning from Learning Forward. And one of the things I'm really proud of in their revisions in 2022 is that they put up a standard around curriculum, instruction, and assessment, and really starting to understand how important rigorous content is as part of professional learning. And it's not just understanding content and building skills within, but it's tying it back to the curriculum in use. Because ultimately going back to that curriculum that has a scope and sequence, that has the text, that has the text-dependent questions, that have the tasks that we want teachers to utilize at start to build on, it's taking that knowledge and going back. And we have seen so many states implement science of reading laws in which they talk about teacher prep and they provide fantastic professional learning around the science of reading, and teachers go back into classrooms where they don't have curriculum that is moving in the same direction and is that in fact antithetical to some of the practices that they learned in those professional learning. This grant is an opportunity for that not to happen by getting the right resources, by thinking of the implementation plan and that ongoing support. That professional learning drives educators back to not only learning the content, supporting literacy and literacy skills, but within the context of the materials so you can start to adapt. Supplement is needed and really personalized to meet the needs of kids, but within, again, that skeletal framework, the integrity of following those materials, because they will help guide and support both kids because they experience the resources directly, and teachers in doing so is essential to the instructional core.
Makes me think of the power of and. It's not this or it's not that. It's and. It's multiple things working together. Dr. Guskey?
Yes, I think, I think Eric's right on target with this too. Then that also, prompts another aspect of our standards. One of the things that Learning Forward did, the initial version of the standards was developed, I think, in 2001, and then it was revised in 2011, revised again in 2022. There's a lot of sort of elements that have been a part of it since that 2001 version, but new have been added as education has changed. When the 2022 version was envisioned, the establishment or piloting that, they commissioned a team from the Institute of Educational Studies to do a meta-analysis looking at all the different studies they could find that had looked at professional learning opportunities that had implemented the standards and what impact they had on teaching practices and then on student learning. They conducted their study and they were able to find over 50 studies, 53 studies that had implemented that. And then of those, a smaller group had actually looked at the impact on student learning. When they combined the results from those studies, they found the impact, if you follow the Learning Forward standards, on teaching practices was huge. It was like 0.73. That's huge. I mean, that's like taking from the 50th percentile to like the 78th percentile. I mean, it's really remarkable. Very few innovations in education have that size of an effect. The impact on student learning, 0.09. It seems that we do a much better job of getting teachers to change their practice. We're just not so good at getting those practices to have an impact on student learning. Now, that 0.09 still came out to be significantly different from 0, but in comparison, it's so modest. And so the idea is, if we're so good at getting to change your practice, why isn't it having an impact on student learning? We just have been working on some studies trying to figure that out, but it does seem clear that we have, part of the reason is we focus so much on implementation and not enough on results, that we really need to start thinking about what impact we want to have on students and how we can get there. So again, even with our curriculum-based professional learning, what we want to do is to start by asking that question: how is it going to affect our students? And not only in terms of improvements in scores in reading literacy or comprehension, but also all these other variables that might be impacted as well. If they're doing better, are they enjoying school more? Are they feeling more confident of themselves as learners? Are they developing a sort of growth mindset? Are they developing a greater sense of student agency or self-efficacy? Is it impacting their behavior and their achievement in other subjects? I mean, if they do better in classes in reading and literacy, is that going to improve what they're doing in social studies or in science, which is primarily reading based? Or are they doing better in math problem solving where there are word problems? All those things could be sort of what we call unintended positive consequences that could be a very important part of this work. But it's really using that as our target from the start and trying to identify those things we'd want to see, and then using this as a strategy to get to that.
Thank you. I'm looking at our time and notice that we're running short. So I'm gonna kind of speed us through this next section on leadership moves. And I think we've talked about our first question just a little bit about, you know, structures that we can put in place to make sure professional learning is functioning. We've talked about that process, having a plan. But I really want us to spend this just a couple of remarks on this last question, because I think it's really powerful. How can we know sooner rather than later that this is working? Like, we can't wait until the state data comes out, right? Like, that's a year away. How can we know? What are some things that schools might consider around that? So if Dr. Guskey, you might make a few remarks and then Eric follow up.
Here, yeah, Jenni, this is a very important issue. I can't emphasize this enough. In fact, several years ago, I was being interviewed by the Learning Forward journal about the learning professional, and they asked me, when teachers are engaged in a new approach, a new strategy, a new curriculum implementation, how soon should they see results? And my good friends, you know, Michael Full and Andy Hargreaves, were talking about, oh, it's a long process, and it might take quite a while. We need to sustain support over multiple years in order really to get this done. I said, in 2 weeks. They were shocked. They were just shocked. But I said that because all the evidence we were gathering showed that if teachers don't see results pretty quickly, they're going to revert back to the tried and true things they've always done. And it's not because they're afraid of change. It's that teachers are so committed to the learning of their students, and they are unwilling to sacrifice their students for the sake of innovation. And so what we need to do is to really have meaningful conversations with teachers and ask them directly, if this was working, how would you know it? How would you tell from your students that this was really making a difference for them? And they've got to get that pretty quickly. I mean, I look at this in terms of how people advertise their exercise programs or their diet programs. I mean, nobody's going to stay on an exercise or diet program for 3 months if they don't see some results pretty quickly. I mean, I've been getting these flyers through different media sources now about this new chair workout they're advertising for men, you know, and their whole advertisement is, you will feel results in a week, you'll see results in 2 weeks, and your friends will compliment you on the results in 3 weeks. I mean, that's amazing, but it works. And the same would hold true for our teachers. We need to sit down with them, and I think leaders need to consider this. and just ask them, if this was making a difference, how would you know? And how would you know pretty quickly? Because when they start seeing those results, they will not abandon it. Seeing results with their kids is the most important thing there is for teachers. Teachers are there because they want to have an impact on their kids. And if we can show them this does make a difference, wow, they're going to be as strong as advocates.
Yeah. And I would just add, we've learned a lot from the improvement sciences, that there are ways to rapidly test and pivot and make changes. Districts should be really thoughtful about what assessments are designed to assess in the first place, and think about a mix in an evaluation plan for this grant around formative assessment data, which, as Dr. Guskey says, we can start to see things immediately with teacher-created measures through PLCs, exit tickets, formative pieces, thinking about interim assessments and those benchmarks, and then finally those summative assessments, as we said at the beginning, are important, but you can't wait for it. So I think really thinking for districts, a couple things. You have an opportunity in this grant to build in a robust assessment plan. So think about your logic model, think about the kinds of data you can gather. They'll all have different errors, they'll all be imperfect, but how do those come together at different scale in different ways so you can continue to implement your curriculum with integrity on behalf of kids? And last piece on this grant, continue to think, because you actually have resources. We know with ESSER funds leaving, we know how tight budgets are. This is an opportunity to think about your own capacity. What can you do in the district or in schools? Where do you need outside groups like CTL? Where can you draw resources? For example, Rivet has a professional learning guide that they actually have some evaluations of curriculum-based professional learning providers and a list of folks who can provide specific on curriculum that maybe you can build into this grant. So this is an opportunity to think about what you can do, how you can build your capacity in the long run to not only pay for and pick phenomenal materials that can serve at the core, but also to get the support, to get the expertise to make that a reality in classrooms.
Thank you both. And before I pass this back to Emily, I just want to thank you both for being here and sharing this space with us and contributing your immense expertise around this. I'm so much smarter now than I was 45 minutes ago. So I just want to personally say thank you both. Emily?
Yeah. I just have one question that's come in for the team, and I'll pop it to you now in the Q&A. If attendees have other questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A, and we'll either try to attend to them quickly now or can follow up with you individually. You know, I've spent the last 3 years doing almost exclusively curriculum-based professional learning all over the country, and every single time that I am out doing learning experiences for teachers, I get kind of the same question. It can be phrased differently, but we're doing curriculum-based professional learning. We are looking at grade level materials. And the question from teachers is, my students are not ready for this. This is too difficult. This is too complex for not all, but many of my students. You know, I'm a 10th grade English teacher and 30% of my class is 2 or more years behind. But I have to teach these grade level materials. Emily, what do I do? And, you know, I have ways that I would respond to them, but since we have other minds in the room today, what would be some of the feedback that you, Jenni, Eric, or Dr. Guskey would give? I know our leaders on the call are going to get that question as well. Feel free to jump in right in.
No, go ahead, Eric.
I would say, let's remember the intent from teachers around doing that is because they care so much about the kids in their classroom and hate to watch them struggle. But the education endeavor is about productive struggle, and we can't abandon grade level work, text-dependent tasks, and think that we are doing a service for children as a result. So the key question is, how are we going to use this curriculum? Think about how to accelerate learning and support those kids. ideally in tier 1 curriculum. If we have to think about supplements in tier 2 to accelerate, we need to do that well, but do not abandon the rigor, the grade level content, switch out texts that are not at grade level and aren't of the quality, and think that's right for kids. It is doing a disservice for kids, particularly the kids who are behind. I understand it's easy for me to say this in a home office as opposed to in a classroom full of 20, let's be optimistic, or 30 first graders. But using the material and not abandoning it and not sacrificing the rigor because we think that's right for kids, it's not. Leaning in, scaffolding, thinking together, looking at that assessment data and thinking about how to individualize instruction to accelerate those gaps, so many of them that we see now from the pandemic, is what needs to happen.
And I would just add, as somebody who does get to go into schools and classrooms, yes to all of that. And for us, it's an equity issue. All means all. Every single kid deserves that high quality education and resources. And as teachers, part of our job is to, you mentioned it, scaffolding. How can we get them there? That's the beauty and the art of teaching.
Right. Yeah, and I would just add to both of those because they're such great ideas that a lot of times teachers look at this and they say, well, it's too much. These kids are 2 and 3 years behind. I'm never going to be able to remedy that. But what we find is that if teachers can look at those early units and identify what they might consider to be the necessary prerequisites for success in that unit. The 2 or 3 things that seem to be really important just for this upcoming unit. And you take a little bit of time to teach those prerequisites so that everybody starts that unit on sort of a level playing field. You're not going to, teach what they have lost in the last 4 or 5 years. You're going to teach what is necessary, these prerequisites for this next unit, to spend a little bit of time teaching that. We find the effects of doing that can be very, very powerful. And so, just as Eric said, you don't lessen it for them. You still want to provide that challenge, but you want to give them prerequisites so they can face that challenge on an even playing field. So, from an instructional perspective, just to get the teachers to think about, in order for my students to do well in this unit, what are the things, the 2 or 3 things that they really need to have? And I'm going to spend a little bit of time teaching everybody those 2 or 3 things to a mastery level, and then I'm going to start the unit, and then they're going to be able to do that well. The next unit, I think of the same thing. And so I'm picking up those back things, in a cumulative way, just 1 or 2 at a time, not 50 things at one time. And that allows teachers to really guarantee that success. And when students gain that success, then they have the prerequisites oftentimes for what's necessary in the next unit. So those little steps can be very, very powerful.
Well, thank you all for that. I think those are, questions I certainly got as a school leader, questions that I get very typically when I'm out doing professional learning. So I appreciate your perspective on that. To wrap things up, I do want to give our panelists, obviously, thank you, all of the 3 of you for being here and sharing your expertise. Jenni, I'm actually going to ask you to go to the next slide. I'm just going to give sort of my closing words and then invite Mr. Hirsch and Dr. Guskey to do the same. This is meant to be a support to anybody who is looking at HQIR adoption, implementation, professional learning. We're here to be a support for you. You can scan this QR code and book a meeting with me. We can connect you with Jenni. We've got a lot of experience, Jenni in particular, in the role of district leader, making these kinds of decisions. I've got a wealth of experience being on the other end of things, working for publishers, designing professional learning. So if you're just looking for a thought partner, what kinds of questions should I be asking of the materials, of the professional learning? We're happy to think through that with you. And with that, I will hand it to you, Mr. Hirsch. Any sort of closing thoughts, resources you want to point people to?
Just thanks for having me. Please come to edreports.org. Come check out our reviews as you're looking at the material. And let me tell you, yesterday we launched our 2.0 criteria that we will start using January 1st, because if you are going to look at evidence-based curriculum, evidence is not static. So we had already updated our foundational skills criteria and have reviews up there, but we're also updated our comprehensive ELA criteria. So not only as you're looking at our reviews that are up there, but
Sure.
thinking about what it means to be evidence-based, we have new indicator around bloat, because we know so many of these ELA materials are huge, and that gets at some of the implementation challenges. We've really thought about knowledge building and the like. So look at the new criteria, but mostly come on, check out those adoption steps, and mostly utilize those educator-led reviews as you think about what HQIR, when you get this grant, because you'll all be successful in getting this grant, and come on in.
Excellent. Thank you. And how about you, Dr. Guskey? Any final thoughts, resources to share?
Well, like Eric, I just want to thank you for inviting me to be part of this. This is such important work, and it was really an honor to be a part of the group this morning. I would say, too, that in terms of this effort, there's a lot of sort of bad press on professional learning. And it's true that a lot of the stuff we do hasn't worked very well. However, there's never been improvement in education in the absence of professional learning. Any improvement effort that has ever succeeded has always had a very strong professional learning component. So we know that this is really essential. The key is how to do it really well. And we've got some great ideas on how to do that much better. If you would like additional information about any of the things that I've described this morning, I do a website. It says guskey.com. You can find articles about this. But again, I just wanted to say I'm very pleased to be a part of the group, and the work you're doing is so valuable. I really hope that what we've been able to offer this morning contributes to the success of that work.
Thank you all. And thank you, Jenni. Any closing thoughts from you?
No, again, just I'm grateful to be in the presence of amazing people today and thought partners. And I hope that those who are out there online joining us got some great ideas for moving forward.
Thank you all. Thank you for your time. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We'll send out follow-up with recording and some resources for you to take a peek at. Feel free to book time with us. Good luck in all your endeavors all across the country, because everybody's calling in from lots of different places. And we really appreciate your time. Have a good day. Take care.